Think about it for a second. What interests you about true crime? Is it the motive behind a homicide or disappearance? Trying to figure out why people do such awful things? The case we're looking at today is so wild, we will be thinking about these questions for years to come. This is the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, two people who caused so much mayhem in such a short space of time that they will for sure go down in the history books. This case is still ongoing, and it seems like every time there's an update, the story just gets crazier. Let's dive in. On November 5th, 2019, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell married on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, in a simple yet beautiful ceremony right on the beach. At the same time, a team of investigators were looking into multiple deaths connected to the couple, as well as the disappearance of Lori's son and daughter. To understand this story completely, we have to go back to 1992, when a 19-year-old Lori married the first of her 5 husbands. Nelson Yanes was Lori's high school boyfriend, and while the two seemed to be very much in love, the marriage only lasted a short time before ending in divorce. In 1995, she married William Laglioa in Travis County, Texas, quite a distance from her home in San Bernardino, California. They had a son together, Colby, but their marriage came to an end in 1998. In 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., who legally adopted Colby and helped raise him as his own son. The couple had their own daughter, a girl named Tylee, a year later, but unsurprisingly, the marriage didn't last. Lori and Joseph's divorce was finalized in 2005, and after that, Joseph still kept in regular contact in order to see Colby and Tylee. That changed in 2007 when Joseph got into an altercation with Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who tasered Joseph and threatened to end his life. Alex served 90 days in jail for this, but it wasn't the last time he'd allegedly jumped to the defense of his sister in an aggressive way. Joseph passed away suddenly in 2018 from a heart attack. For reasons that will become clear later, his death is being investigated. In 2006, Lori married Leland Anthony Vallow, who preferred to go by Charles. This would be her longest-lasting marriage, but maybe the most destructive. All her life, Lori had been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS for short, which you may know by its more notorious name, Mormonism. After they got married, Charles converted to Lori's faith after being a Catholic all his life. He had 2 sons from a previous marriage who lived with him, Lori, Colby, and Tylee. In 2013, the couple adopted J.J., who was Charles's grandnephew. J.J. was given to them when he was just a few months old and would later be diagnosed with special needs. Their big blended family moved out of Kauai, yes, the same place she later married Chad, for a couple of years before relocating to Arizona in 2016, where things began to fall apart. During their time in Kauai, Lori discovered some novels by a fellow member of her church. Can you guess who that was? It was Chad Daybell. Chad wrote books about the end of times, telling the story of a group of LDS followers who go on a journey to rid the US of wickedness. It's, a pretty niche genre, but Lori became obsessed with his books. After moving to Arizona, Lori and a friend attended an open event by Preparing a People. It's tough to define what Preparing a People is. You and I might call it a movement or even a cult, but the organization itself is adamant that those terms do not represent them. It's not a group and it's not a cult or something people join, but it has educational lecture events that can be attended or watched on video. In short, Preparing a People is a religious organization that focuses on preparing people for the so-called second coming of Jesus. It was at this event where Lori and Chad met for the first time. Lori got super involved with Preparing a People, attending their events, and even becoming a co-host of the podcast they ran, which Chad often appeared in. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Lori had developed some radical beliefs that didn't sit well with Charles, and cracks began to show in their relationships. Lori believed that she was a reincarnated God, and her mission on earth was to prepare for Jesus' return. She'd also become obsessed with near-death experiences and claimed to experience spiritual visions.
She said, "You're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles, but I can murder you now with my powers."
Lori became convinced that Charles was a zombie. According to her beliefs, this meant that Charles's soul was no longer in his body. It was stuck in limbo while trying to reach God and can only be freed with the death of his physical body. The couple separated and Charles filed for divorce, citing that he didn't feel safe around Lori because of her constant threats against him. Then, on July 11th, 2019, Charles went to the house to pick up JJ for school. He didn't leave the home alive. According to Lori and her brother, Alex, she and Charles got into an argument during which he picked up a baseball bat that belonged to Tylee. Lori, Tylee, and JJ ran outside as Alex tried to defuse the situation. He claimed that Charles hit him with the bat, and in self-defense, Alex fired the family's gun at him, killing Charles almost immediately. Strangely, Lori didn't stick around to wait for the police. Wanting to keep JJ's routine consistent, she took them to Burger King for breakfast and then dropped him and Tylee off at school. Although Alex wasn't arrested, the detectives at the scene remember thinking how odd the whole situation was. The case remains open to this day. Then, 2 months later, Lori relocated to Idaho with Tylee, JJ, and Alex. A few miles from her new house, Chad lived with his wife Tammy and their 5 kids. They were married for almost 20 years, but as soon as Lori arrived in town, everything changed. Tammy made a Facebook post on October 9th, 2019 about a pretty scary event at her home. A guy wearing a ski mask was suddenly standing by the back of my car with a paintball gun. He shot at me several times, although I don't think it was loaded. 10 days later, Tammy suddenly died of natural causes in her sleep. Chad declined the opportunity to have an autopsy and became the beneficiary of over $400,000 from Tammy's life insurance policy. Less than a month later, Chad and Lori married in Kauai. Not suspicious at all, right? Well, it gets worse. Some of Lori's relatives reported that they hadn't physically seen Tylee or JJ in weeks, and they didn't even know that the wedding was happening. In the months before they disappeared, Lori had been telling a lot of weird stories about Tylee and JJ. She told acquaintances that Tylee died years ago, that JJ had gone to live with relatives in another state. Sometimes she claimed they didn't exist at all. So when their extended family realized no one had seen them in a pretty long time and they weren't in Hawaii with Lori and Chad, they got worried. After Chad and Lori returned to Idaho a couple of weeks later, the police were called to perform a wellness check on Tylee and JJ. The strange events of the day were recorded in an article by ABC News. Police first spoke to Alex Cox and Chad Daybell outside of the townhomes. According to officers, Daybell acted as if he didn't know Lori Vallow, despite just marrying her. Alex told the officers JJ was safe and well with his grandparents in Louisiana. This was debunked immediately, as it was said it was grandparents who called the police. Lori later told the police that JJ was living out of state with a friend. Her phone records show she called the friend and asked her to corroborate her claims to the police, but she declined to do so. Lori was ordered to provide proof by a certain date that JJ and Tylee were safe, or there would be consequences. Instead of doing that, she and Chad fled back to Hawaii. Concerns grew when it was discovered Lori had returned JJ's support dog to the organization they got him from, then moved all of his and Tylee's possessions into a storage unit. By this point, the media was heavily invested in the case as it evolved, and then they quickly tracked down Lori and Chad.
Lori, Nate Eaton with East Idaho News. Can you tell me where your kids are? Where are your kids? No comment? They've been missing for 4 months. You have nothing to say?
On December 9th, 2019, Tammy's remains were exhumed as investigators uncovered something alarming. A couple of weeks before Tammy passed away, Lori used Charles's Amazon account to purchase 2 wedding rings. This indicated to police that Lori and Chad were planning to get married long before Tammy died. With that and Tammy's encounter with the stranger on her driveway, there was enough evidence to suggest her death wasn't natural at all. An autopsy was performed and she was reburied the same day. Her autopsy results were delivered to the investigators in Idaho in February 2020, but the detectives haven't disclosed anything in the report. Literally the day after the autopsy, Lori's brother Alex passed away. 2 weeks prior, he and his girlfriend Zuluma Pastinez had gotten married in a quick ceremony in Las Vegas, Nevada. Alex took Zuluma's surname and moved into her home, where they kept their marriage a secret from Zuluma's son. He collapsed in his bathroom early in the morning and was pronounced dead at the hospital. A medical examiner concluded he died from natural causes, and while he did have an autopsy, he was also cremated. A lot of people are suspicious about the circumstances of Alex's passing, especially with what the police uncovered next. After failing to prove to the courts that Tylee and JJ were safe, Lori was arrested in Hawaii on February 20th, 2020, and extracted back to Idaho. She was charged charged with 2 felony counts of child desertion, and her bail was set at $5 million. She pleaded not guilty, and shortly after arriving back in Idaho, her bail was reduced to $1 million. In June 2020, following the death of Alex Cox, the police performed a forensic examination on his phone. In the days it's believed that Tylee and J.J. disappeared in September 2019, Alex spent a significant amount of time in an isolated area on Chad's property. A search of the location was carried out, and it was there that they discovered the remains of Tylee and J.J. They were hidden in shallow graves covered by rocks and wooden planks. Chad was immediately arrested and charged with destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. He pleaded not guilty, and he and Lori had to sit in jail and wait for their trials, as many legal proceedings were pushed back due to the pandemic. Then, literally on the day I'm writing this, we got an update. On May 26, 2021, Lori and Chad have both been charged with the homicides of Tylee and J.J. Chad has also been charged with the homicide of his ex-wife Tammy, so there must have been some pretty damning evidence in that autopsy. There's no word yet on whether Lori will receive any charges regarding Charles's death or Alex's. People have started to speculate that he participated in the killings of Tylee and J.J., and Lori had taken him out to keep him quiet. As he was cremated, a second autopsy cannot be performed unless there's other evidence in his original autopsy. We may never know what happened to Alex. The one thing we do know for certain is that the rest of Lori's family are devastated by what happened to Tylee and J.J. It's so unfair they got caught up in all of this, but now that Lori and Chad have been arrested, I hope they'll be able to get justice. That brings us to the end of today's video. What do you think of this case? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.